everybody, welcome back to week 3 of the Sourdough Era course. Today we are going to be talking about how to make sourdough focaccia. So I'm going to give everyone just a minute to join, but we will be going through what sourdough focaccia is. I'm going to walk you through the process of making sourdough focaccia and then answer any questions that you have. But the awesome thing about sourdough focaccia is how easy it is to make. It's actually one of my favorite things to make because it's easier than making sourdough bread, in my opinion. So I feel like it's a really good beginner-friendly bread to make. So we'll kind of talk through all of that. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Okay, so to briefly discuss what sourdough focaccia actually is, if you are not familiar at all, it is essentially a thicker flatbread. It's known for having like a crispy crust and a soft, fluffy interior. Thank you. I'm so glad that you like my recipes. It has a lot of olive oil usually in it, but you'll find some of my dessert type focaccias that I share on my website replace olive oil with butter, so it just kind of depends on the recipe. But for a standard focaccia, you're going to be using olive oil with your dough. So the biggest differences with sourdough focaccia versus sourdough bread. With sourdough focaccia, you're going to bake it in like a 9x13 pan, so you don't have to have like a Dutch oven or anything. It's a very similar, the recipes on my blog for sourdough bread and sourdough focaccia are pretty similar. The biggest difference is that focaccia we're going to add more water to. That just helps to really get a nice thin crispy crust and get it nice and airy, so it's really soft and fluffy on the inside. The other big pro of sourdough focaccia is that you don't have to shape it. So that is another reason that I really like sourdough focaccia. It's just so easy. I feel like it has a really big window of when you can bake it, so it's very forgiving. You know, a sourdough bread, if it sits for too long, then what happens is it's really hard to shape. It flattens out when you bake it. But the good news is when you make sourdough focaccia, it already is supposed to be flat, so that makes life a little bit easier. All right, so we are going to just get started with it, and we'll just start talking through the recipe. So if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat as we're going, and we'll go from there. I feel like every time I do this live, I'm like, my starter is just never quite ready. I need to wake up a little bit earlier to feed it. But, you know, mornings are just crazy trying to get my boys out the door for school. So it just never gets fed quite in time. But here's what my starter looks like right now. It's pretty bubbly on the sides. It does have some bubbles on top, but it could use a few more. Well, maybe one of these times when I do the live, my starter will actually be ready when we do this, but just know you would want it to sit for a little bit longer if we weren't doing it for this video. So the things that you'll need for sourdough focaccia, it's pretty basic. You just need bread flour, warm water, active sourdough starter, and some kind of olive oil, and salt. And then as far as equipment goes, you'll want a kitchen scale. And I talked about this last week in the sourdough bread video, but I like having a straight edge 2-quart container. That way it makes it very easy to see when this dough is ready to go. Okay, so we'll just get started with making it. And it's going to be 400 grams of water. So like I said, this is pretty high hydration, and I would say the number one question, concern, thing that I see in the comments of my focaccia recipes is people are like, this dough is so sticky. And yep, it is very sticky because it is a very high hydration dough. It takes a little getting used to, but I promise that's normal. We're going to add 150 grams of your active sourdough starter. So other things, if your dough seems like ridiculously sticky, like I'll show you this texture. If it's way worse than that, there are a couple things that could be issues. Number one, the type of bread flour you're using. I always use King Arthur. It has a high protein content. Some of the bread flours out there don't have as high of a protein content, so they might not be able to absorb as much water. So maybe if you're noticing that, you could reduce the amount of water in your recipe by like 25 to 50 grams. See if that helps. Another thing is if your starter is either weak or is really past peak, it can become more acidic, which leads to a very sticky dough. So that could be another reason your sourdough starter might be part of the problem. Okay, I'm just gonna I forgot to grab a spoon. I'm gonna grab a spoon really quick for this. Sorry, left you hanging. Okay, people are joining. They're like, where is she? Our dishwasher died this weekend, which is so sad, and we don't get another one till next Tuesday. And so I have a lot of dirty dishes right now that need to be washed. But thankfully I found a spoon. Okay, so we're doing, like I was saying, we're doing 400 grams of water and 150 grams of sourdough starter. So I'm just scraping this here. Now let's say I have more sourdough starter. So let's say this is all the starter I have. Look how there's like hardly anything left in here. The good news is you could still feed that and keep your starter going. I think people think they need like way more starter than they actually do. You can feed your starter based on just the scraping the sides of the jar, and you can keep your starter going. So it's pretty cool that you really don't need to keep much starter. Okay, have no towel over here. Okay, and then we're going to do 10 grams of salt. And if you're just joining, we're making sourdough focaccia. We're going through that process. Okay, got my 10 grams of salt. I like to just give this a quick mix before I add in my flour. So we'll just mix this up. Just to start getting the starter dissolved, it just makes it a little bit easier to combine with the flour if this is already starting to be broken up. Okay, and I'm just using a dough whisk. This one is from Barlow & Co. I really like the quality of Barlow & Co. They're based out of Utah, small business. So I really like theirs. But you can also find some on Amazon. I do, if you like Barlow & Co.'s and want to get them, I do have a coupon code. It should be Country Road Sourdough, and that gives you 10% off. Okay, this is good enough. It's not fully dissolved, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now I'm going to, I just clear my scale every single time. I'm going to get flour. I'm going to do 500 grams of bread flour. Eventually. Come on. Okay, and that's all that's going in to our dough. So we're going to mix this up. And we want it to be combined so that all of the dry bits are incorporated. Just out of curiosity, drop into the comments, let me know, have you ever made sourdough focaccia before, or is this your first time hearing about it? Have you been intimidated to try? Let me know down below. I posted today a carousel talking about different flavors, I really like to swap out my water with other liquids in my focaccia. And what's awesome is, because you don't have to shape it, like, I feel like you can use a lot of different liquids, even if they might be like more acidic or something. But you could do like, I've done pumpkin puree, I've done applesauce, I've done apple juice, orange juice, dare I say salsa? Now I'm blanking. Oh, I've done like milk, hot chocolate, pineapple juice. So it's pretty fun. I feel like once you get the idea of focaccia, like the possibilities are really endless, and you can top it with whatever you want. Someone said they use brown sugar and cinnamon. That sounds yummy. And when I have a sweet dough, I oftentimes will also add in like 50 grams of sugar into my dough. Okay, I'm just looking to see. So it's pretty mixed, whether you guys have made it or not before. Somebody said they tried but didn't turn out. So dry. Okay. A blueberry lemon sourdough focaccia. Oh yes, I have one of those recipes on my blog. Okay, awesome. I'm glad that some of you have tried it, and I'm excited for those of you that haven't. Hopefully this encourages you to go and try it. Okay, I think mostly all my flour here is incorporated. Let me just scrape the sides real quick, just make sure. You can also, like, you don't have to use a dough whisk. You could always just use your hands too. Okay, I really need to bring a towel over here. Just lick my hand. Okay, now I'm going to put on gloves because my skin gets really irritated when I'm working with dough. So I always just use gloves. Makes my life easier. All right, and this is what my dough looks like. Okay, hold on. I need to block somebody really quick. Okay. So lovely, spammers. Okay, so this is what my dough looks like right now. See, it is pretty sticky. Like, I get where people are coming from, because if this was my dough at the end, I would be like, what is happening? Okay, this is normal. This is what you want. Okay. I should have brought a little water over here. Okay, that's okay. But yeah, this is what my dough looks like right now. It's not really coming together right now. It's very sticky. You might be thinking at this point, like, how is this going to come together? I promise it will come together in focaccia. Okay. And then I would just cover this dough and leave it at like 75 degrees. So I'm just going to put a cover on it. I shared these in my last live. These are from Wild Clementine Co. No affiliate to them. I just really love her covers. So I will link them. Okay, someone's asking, how warm is your water and how much flour? So it was 500 grams of flour, 400 grams of water, and my water was slightly warmer than room temperature. I mentioned this in my last live too. I'm not very good at actually temping my water. I just don't do it. But I would probably say about 80 degrees probably. Okay, so we eventually will go from, it's like a little cooking show here. We'll go from here, and I'll show you kind of where it's at on the line. Here, if I scrape this down on the side. This is why these straight edge containers are so awesome. Okay, so I know, like, based on where my focaccia dough always ends up at, that when I hit this line here on my 2-quart container, that like my focaccia dough is done and ready to go. And you can see how bubbly it is on the sides. Great sign. It has risen 50% in size. And then I'll also show you, don't want to get dough all over my hands. Okay. I'll show you. Here's the top here. See, it is very jiggly. Well, it did have a couple, you can see a couple bubbles here on the side maybe. It's so hard to show you guys on the video here. But this dough is ready to go into the second rise. So, okay, let me back up here. How did we get from here to here? So, what we're going to do is we let this dough, after it's been mixed, we're going to let it sit for 30 minutes. Then we're going to go into a series of stretch and folds, similar to how we're doing it with sourdough bread, if you've made sourdough bread before. So this one, we're going to let it sit 30 minutes, then we're going to do a set of stretch and folds. I'll show you how to do that in just a couple minutes, but we'll do our stretch and folds. So you shimmy up the dough, bring it on top of itself, do that 4 times around, and that's one set. Ideally, you want to try and get 3 sets in. Now, if you can't get 3 sets in, sometimes I can only get 1 set in, or I can only get 2 sets in. It's not that big of a deal, so don't stress about that. But you want to try, the more stretch and folds you do, the stronger your dough is. The stronger your dough is, the more airy and fluffy that your crumb can become. So it's to your advantage if you can do all 3 sets of stretch and folds. Highly recommend doing that. And you want to wait about 30 minutes in between each set of stretch and folds. 30 minutes is not like a hard and fast rule. Like if you are 20 minutes or 40 minutes, or maybe it's like an hour before you get to the next one. It's not that big of a deal. Just roughly about 30 minutes in between, because you want the dough to have time to relax before you tighten it back up again. Once you do your 3 sets of stretch and folds, then you're going to just let your dough continue to sit. I recommend, like in my recipe, I have a sample schedule, and that's based off 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And I find it usually takes between 4 to 5 hours, depending on how strong and active my starter is, and if my dough is actually a little warmer than 75 degrees. Sometimes it goes a little bit quicker, but roughly about 5 hours, you'll get it to about 50%. Now, if you came back and it was risen more than 50%, like I said, the good thing about focaccia is it's pretty forgiving, because again, you're doing it in a flatbread. So if it's a little over, it's not too big of a deal. Okay, any questions on that? So total time from the time it's mixed to here takes about 4 to 5 hours. That's where we're at for this time frame. This is a same day recipe, which is nice. You can mix up in the morning and have it in time for dinner, because I do find focaccia is my favorite the first day. I don't love as much how focaccia stores. If you heat it up, it tastes pretty good, but you can't, like, it's just not as good the following days as is that first day, because the first day it's so, like, the crust is so, like, crispy and delicious and so soft and fluffy on the inside. So don't get me wrong, I was just eating jalapeno cheddar focaccia here like 20 minutes ago. That was 2 days old, and I was having no problem scarfing that down. It's just really, really good first day. Okay, I didn't see any questions on that process, so I will keep going. Okay, and a couple people are asking about overproof dough. I will get to that in 1 second here after I put this into the pan. Okay, so here's a 9x13 pan. And I already sprayed this with a non-stick spray. I have like an olive oil non-stick spray that I usually spray on my pans just to make sure extra coverage. Okay, and then I would add about 2 tablespoons of my olive oil to the bottom of my pan. And I'm going to be honest, most of the time I just eyeball this. Unless you're like pools and pools of olive oil, it's not going to really like change that much. Okay, so here's my olive oil, kind of coated the bottom. I can put my sticky gloves back on. And then we are going to put our dough into the pan. All right, so I'm just going to kind of scrape down the sides. And here, I'll show you. Like, see how this dough much stronger. You know, even though it's wet and sticky, you know, it's still strong. It passes this, what's called the window pane test, where you can pull your dough thin enough that you can see light through without it tearing. So it is stronger. It is still wet. It is a wet dough. It's supposed to be a wet dough. I know I'm harping on that a lot, but that is probably the number one concern that I see is like, this is still like a sticky mess. And like, yeah, it is sticky. If I'm like, you know, if I went and tried to knead this right now, like, yeah, it's going to stick to my hands. If you're doing like quick movements, you know, you're not touching it a ton, it won't be that sticky. And you can even put a little, get your hands damp. You could put a little olive oil on your hands. Okay, that was a good dump. Okay, here I'm gonna bring this down a little bit more. Okay, so here's my dough in here. That's what it looks like right now. And usually I like to do one flip over so olive oil is coated on both sides. And then what I like to do is just kind of stretch this out to start filling the pan a little bit. And then I would cover this, and I'm gonna let this sit for another like 2 to 3 hours. This is the key to focaccia, is you want to make sure it is really fluffy and jiggly when you go to dimple it. If it's not fluffy and jiggly when you go to dimple it, it's not ready yet. I mean, there is a point of where it's a little too overproofed, and then it won't rise as much once it bakes. But once this fills out, it doubled in size, and like when I dimple this, it should actually like I should see bubbles popping up, and it feel fluffy and soft. That's what you're looking for. I also forgot to mention, I should have said this at the beginning, but I have a email list, and everybody on my email list gets a recap of these lives I've been doing every week. This is week 3 of a 6-part series. So you can jump on my email list. I will link it after this in stories. But you can join my email list, and then I send a recap with like everything that we talked about. I share the recipes, any links that I talked about from the class. I include all that information. So it's very helpful to get on my email list. And if you join that email list as well, and you're brand new to it, it will also send you an email with the previous 2 recaps, so you can catch up if you wanted to on making a starter and making a loaf of sourdough bread, which are the last 2 topics that I covered. Okay, so I have my focaccia here that is ready to dimple. I did put it in a little bit of a smaller pan. It's just what I had available at the time. But you can also bake in a cast iron pan if you want to. You don't have to bake in a 9x13. But do you see how like this has filled? It is very jiggly. This is what you're looking for. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to dimple this. So I'm going to add a little bit more olive oil on top, about 2 tablespoons or so. And this is when I could add any seasonings or toppings that I wanted. So you could add like cheese, you could add spices, herbs, fresh herbs, whatever you want to add here. So I'm going to use, this is Italian, what's it called? Italian style sofrito blend. It's from Trader Joe's. Oh, it's not focusing. There we go. This is from Trader Joe's. I love this stuff. Obviously, if you don't have a Trader Joe's, you don't have to use it, but this is just a spice that I really like to use. Okay, so I'm just going to sprinkle it on top. You can just measure from the heart. But I do have a lot of recipes on my website that feature exact measurements if you're like, I don't like to just guess what to use. Okay, and then I'm just going to dimple this. See how it like dimples in, and you bring your fingertips down and you press in till you hit the bottom. This deflated a little bit. I think I actually overproofed this dough because I had put it at a really hot temperature because I wanted it to be ready in time. So this deflated a little bit more than I wanted. Hopefully it still bakes up good. It'll just probably be a little bit flatter. But you'll see like the bubbles throughout. It's nice and jiggly. This is what we are looking for. The name of that herb was Trader Joe's Italian Style Sofrito Blend. It's very, very good. I would make a trip to Trader Joe's just for that. And while you're there, grab sea salt caramels if they have them in stock yet. They're so good with chocolate chip cookies. I've tried caramel chips from other places and they just aren't as good. Okay, so then once this is ready, so from this point to this point, about 2 to 3 hours, okay? Once it's filled the pan, it's, nice and jiggly and fluffy, and it's ready to dimple, then I would go ahead and dimple it out and then immediately bake it. Bake it at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 27 to 30 minutes. Okay, so that would be the next step, and then after that, you just eat it. And if you're wondering, like, what do you eat focaccia with? You can have it with soups. You can make a sandwich out of it. You can just eat it plain, which is oftentimes what we do. We just eat it. I don't know. If anyone else has ideas down there, I'm like blanking right now. But there's plenty of ways that you can eat your focaccia. Why are my pants like covered in dough? What the heck? Anyways. Okay, let's go back to this and do a stretch and fold. Somebody's asking, where do you sign up for the email list? I will post a story right after this with the link to it, so you can join there. Okay. I'll also, when I post this to my feed, I will add an automation so that if you comment email on this live after it's been posted, you should be able to get the automation there as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a set of stretch and folds on this. So I'm going to bring my dough and I'm going to lift it up and bring it on top of itself. See how it held together, like it's even. It's getting stronger even in just that little amount of time. I'm going to bring it up and then fold it on top of itself. I should have my hand damp. That would help with the stickiness a little bit, but I don't have any water over here. Okay, that's 3. And then one more is 4. And that's my set of stretch and folds. Ideally, you want to do this 3 times, about 30 minutes in between each. So to recap really quickly, and then I'll talk about overproofed sourdough bread and how you can make focaccia with it. So you're going to, this is my dough. You're going to start by mixing up your dough, and then after it sits for 30 minutes at about 75 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to do a set of stretch and folds, let it sit for roughly another 30 minutes, second set of stretch and folds, 30 minutes, third set of stretch and folds. Ideally, if you can't get all 3 sets in, that's okay. After that, you're going to let it rise 50%, and that takes about, from start to finish, about 4 to 5 hours. I find like 4.5 to 5 hours. I usually just look when it hits this line, it's ready to go. Once it hits that, then I grease my 9x13 pan or my cast iron skillet, whichever you want to use. I'm going to dump the dough into it, and I'm going to let that dough sit for 2 to 3 hours at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. After that 2 to 3 hours, it's ready to bake. Usually it should be light and airy, fluffy. Going to dimple it out with my fingertips, pressing it all the way in till it hits the bottom of the pan. Dimple it out, and then I'm going to bake it 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 27 to 30 minutes about. And that's it. Oh, if you use a glass pan, just note that's going to be longer than 30 minutes. You're probably looking at more like 35, 40 minutes. So I always recommend baking anything bread related in a like metal or aluminum pan or a dark pan versus a glass pan. Okay. And that covers the whole thing. I'll give you guys a minute. If you have any questions, you can ask them. Like I said, like focaccia really is fairly simple. But as far as overproof dough into focaccia, I had a few questions on that. So if you want to make, let's say you made a loaf of sourdough bread, and when you went to score it or you flipped it onto the parchment paper to put into your Dutch oven, it immediately just goes, like it's not holding its shape, not holding structure. You most likely have overproof. Well, one of the reasons it could be that is if you overproofed your dough. So if it rose too much. So at that point, what you could do is you can, one, bake in a loaf pan, and then it gives those hard structure to force it to rise. Or you can make focaccia out of it, which is one of my favorite things to do. Will it be as soft and fluffy as like your normal focaccia that was proofed correctly? Probably not. It's probably going to be a little bit flatter, but it's still delicious and yummy. You could even make it into like a pizza crust almost, where you have the flatbread and you just add your toppings on top. That would be yummy too. But you can take your overproof dough, put it into a 9x13 pan, add your olive oil, dimple it out, bake it. Same way you would bake this focaccia, so 425, about 27 to 30 minutes. So that's one option. If you've overproofed your dough and you're like, I don't know what to do with this, you don't want to throw it away, definitely don't throw it away. Put it into a 9x13 pan and just bake it as focaccia. Okay, I saw a couple questions in here. Do you let it rise once you dimple it? No, once it's been dimpled, then you immediately put it into your oven to bake it. Okay. If you overproof your sourdough, is focaccia the only option? Will it never be sourdough bread? So if you overproof it, like I said, you could also put it into a loaf pan. So you could, if you still want it to be more in like bread shape, you could put it into your loaf pan, because then it has those sides, so it forces it to rise instead of flattening out. So that's one option. If your dough is just a little bit overproof, like it will still hold somewhat of a shape, you could just bake it and it will just probably not rise as much. If you still wanted it to be a loaf. You can make the focaccia. I'm trying to think if there's anything else you could really do with it. Those would be the main things. And if you have overproof sourdough, it's still good. And if it didn't turn out in the end, you could also just, chop it up, make it into croutons or something, because sourdough croutons are delicious. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to scroll back to see questions. Oh, somebody said their daughter makes sheet pans for a restaurant and they make it into sandwiches. Yeah, focaccia sandwiches are really delicious. I have a cheddar bacon ranch sourdough focaccia that is really good as sandwiches. Okay. How do you avoid overproofing? So overproofing is when you let it rise for too long. If we're talking about with sourdough focaccia, if you're following a similar timeline, keeping it at a similar temperature, you should be good. If you're using, I would recommend, my biggest recommendation would be using straight edge containers, because then you can actually see how much the dough has risen. That's going to be the number one thing that helps you from underproofing and overproofing. If you know how much it's risen and the temperature it's at. So if you don't know what temperature the dough is, you can also get a thermometer, like a meat thermometer, candy thermometer. All of those could work to check the temperature of your dough to make sure it is right. And then once it's in the pan here, if you're only leaving it, 2 to 3 hours, it's getting fluffy, you should be good. Now, if you leave it for like 8 hours, it's probably going to overproof. That's too long of a rise. So you just kind of want to get that timing. And as long as you keep that 75 degrees Fahrenheit, you can follow my recipe pretty similar. And the timing should be about the same. It might vary just a little bit, just because, how active your starter is or whatever. But, yeah, pretty similar timing. Okay. If I have dimpled it, yeah, you can also do that. Let's say your dough's about ready, but you don't end up wanting to bake it that night. So once, I had my dough here, I could either do it before or after dimpling. I could cover this and I could put it into the oven, the refrigerator, covered overnight, let it sit there overnight, and then bake it the next day. that is definitely a good option. Can you cut the recipe in half and use a smaller pan? I'm only cooking for 2. Absolutely. You could cut this recipe in half, just divide all the numbers by 2. It's really easy when you're using grams because you can just divide each of the numbers by 2 and then you have your new measurements. And you could probably use like a 10 by 10 pan or a 9 by 9 pan. Probably either one of those would work to make it in. And you can also freeze sourdough focaccia. It does freeze well. So actually someone was just telling me the other day that they had made my pesto sourdough focaccia and then they sliced it up and put it in the freezer, and then she would just toast one every day, and she said it was delicious. Okay, I'll take a couple more questions. Just want to make sure that the comments keep jumping around as people join and ask questions, so trying to make sure I get them all. If sourdough doubles in size, is that safe to avoid overproofing? It depends on the recipe, but let's say you are having your dough rise, whether it be focaccia dough or sourdough, bread dough. If you're having it rise at a cooler temperature, that dough can rise more than a dough at a warmer temperature, especially if you're like going to be putting it into the fridge. I don't want to get too much into this because I feel like I could go down a huge rabbit hole on this, but for the most part, avoid your dough doubling in size unless your dough is rising at a very cool temperature, like low 60s, or maybe not low 60s, but mid 60s. Your dough might get close to doubling in size, but that's why it's really important to follow the recipe. And there are some recipes out there that will just say like let the dough double in size, but they don't talk about temperature, they don't talk about anything, and then people run into a lot of issues. So highly recommend looking to see on look for a recipe that will show you the temperature and the percent rise, which I do have on mine. And that's totally fine, especially if your house is cold, let's say, and you want to make sure that your focaccia is done in time. Sprinkle in a little bit of yeast, and that will help to get it to rise in time, especially if you don't have anything that can like warm up your dough. Okay, I think that covers everything. Okay, well, thanks for joining. Next week's will be, is it bagels next week? I'm pretty sure it's either bagels. The last 3 that we have, the next 3 weeks are bagels, sandwich bread, and cinnamon rolls. But I think bagels was next on the list. I'll double check. But that'll be next Wednesday. Like I said, I will put into stories my the email list you can join, and you can get the last 2 weeks as well as the recap from this one, which will be posted tomorrow morning. Anyways, have a great day. Thanks for joining. We'll see ya.